Hello, and welcome to the Digital Workspace Works podcast. I'm Ryan Purvis, your host, supported by our producer Heather Bicknell. In this series, you'll hear stories and opinions from experts in the field, stories from the front lines, the problems they face and how they solved them, the areas they focused on from technology, people and processes, to the approaches they took that will help you to get to the grips with the digital workspace inner workings. So welcome, Mark, to the Digital Workspace Works podcast. Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
So thanks, Ryan. Well, thanks for inviting me first off. I mean, I know it's taken us quite a while to actually make this happen.
I think it's actually years.
Yeah, didn't want to say that because you're right. I can certainly recollect it a year or two. And so much has changed since then. So maybe it's made it even more interesting now from the early days when you started it. But anyway, my name is Mark McGregor. For those that don't know me, I've been in and around the computer space now for about 45 years in a number of different capacities, whether that be in project management, computer operations, recruitment, running software businesses, product marketing, product management. But more importantly, to where we're talking about today, for the last 20 years, has all been around process management, process automation in its various guises. So whether we call it BPM, whether we look at BPMS, whether we look at it as change management. And of course, all of those things feed into that key topic of digital transformation.
Great. And we've known each other probably since 2010, I think, because that's when I joined Global 360, which was a BPM company.
Yeah.
And a lot has changed. And we'll talk about it in a sec, but maybe just give us a hint to what you think the digital workspace means to you, and then we'll go into that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, for me, and I think, we probably share similar frustrations, it really means fundamentally rethinking the way that we work, and then to take advantage of new digital technologies and in enabling us to do things that we never thought possible. I get really frustrated that, and I'm sure you've seen it with many of the podcasts and a lot of the stuff you've done. So often I hear people talking about digital transformation, and they're actually not. They're just digitizing. They're doing what they always did, but using automation. Well, that's not a digital transformation. I mean, fundamentally, I guess it's really about saying it's about business transformation enabled by digital. And then when we look at the workplace, there's just so much that it can mean to all of us.
Yeah, I must admit, I think digitalization is part of digital transformation. I don't think it's the same level or whatever. I think it's just a small piece. And I think a lot of the stuff that we did, as I said, back in the Global 360 days, where value was a big thing around building you don't care when you're looking at business process automation. You weren't caring about necessarily the leave or the expense process. You were caring about those core processes that ran the business, contracted billing or something like that, where if you made it more efficient, you saved the business either more money or, it gave more efficiency and more effectiveness. I mean, you can avoid risk as well. I mean, that's pretty much why we started Value, is to do all these things.
Yeah, but if you look at those value gigs that you guys were doing, and, the value consulting stuff, I think was a really great way of looking at it.
Yeah.
It wasn't about taking your existing process and then using the fancy automation. It was about saying, hey, no, you're right. We don't just want to automate the expense process.
Yeah.
It's the value, whether it's the client onboarding, whether it's underwriting, whether it's loan origination. It's about saying, okay, well, now we're going to look at this. Let's rethink what the process should look like. So if you think about those really successful customers, they didn't just ignore the process analysis. And if you think about it, it was one of the things that made you guys a little different around that value consulting, which isn't, hey, you just give us your existing stuff. We're going to show you how to go automate that. And, I can say it now because they don't exist. But, if you think about it, when OpenText bought both, that was part of the mismatch and the arguments between the global people and the Metastorm people, because the Metastorm people was, never mind that analysis crap. Let's just give us what it is and we'll automate it. And away you go. You're all going to be happy. Whereas the Global 360 value approach was saying, well, hang on, let's take a step back. So if you think about it, it was more about digital transformation and less about digitization, even then.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I remember those clashes. I mean, it was ironic in the sense that I knew friends at Metastorm, and when we got merged together, and although we had those conversations in Baltimore, um, the thing was, those low value processes, the expense claim process, they were more valuable automated than they were doing manually, if you think about it, because it was really the same thing. It was just in a different place. But having those bigger discussions with the customer to change things, and then having a number associated to it. And I remember doing this analysis with one of the airlines back in South Africa, where cost of an invoice went from costing like tens of thousands of dollars to costing like $2 because we changed the whole process. And we used, OCR and business rules and all that stuff to fire this thing through. And then I remember doing the same thing with one of the motor manufacturers, and we actually discussed with the CFO renegotiating his contracts with his suppliers based on the repeating process he was getting, or repeating invoices, to say, well, go tell them you'll pay them the same amount every month, and at the end of 6 months you'll just do a true up, but then they must keep delivering the stuff, otherwise the factory stops. And if the factory stops, it's $500,000 to restart it, and they had like 3 in a month or something. So that alone just solved the solution if they ever did it.
Well, that's a great example. I mean, there's and we know it's a mythical story, but the theory is of the Ford guys, when the Ford had the tie-up with Mazda, the purchasing guys going and saying, well, how do you do it? And wow, how do you get it down from 50 to 5? And they work through, see what Mazda are doing. They get it from 50 people down to 5 people. And then one day they're talking with the Toyota guys, and the Toyota guys say, what do you mean? We don't have anyone in purchasing. They said, well, how do you mean? He said, well, we know when a car rolls off the assembly line, there are 4 wheels. Therefore, we have to pay for 4 wheels. We just do it. We don't need all this invoicing and purchasing stuff. Yes, we have a contract negotiation, but it's exactly to your point, as a supplier, it's your job to make sure there's sufficient number of wheels at the front end, and then every time a car rolls off the back, we're going to pay you, because we don't need the rest of the stuff we already know.
Yeah, no, I mean that's an awesome way to think about it, because we almost create admin sometimes because we don't actually rethink the perspective or change the perspective on it. So I really like that as an example. So what kind of work are you doing now then? I mean, what's the kind of consulting that you would be doing with a customer?
Yeah, well, I've been doing a mixed bunch. I mean, most of my stuff over the last few years, a little like we were doing the 360, has really been working with other vendors. So either helping them in terms of the product marketing, and that touches into where you're going, which is moving more into that persona. I still find that there are way too many vendors selling features and all the bits and pieces, and actually not understanding what someone's doing with it. And even where, and particularly in an agile world, you get people that say, oh yeah, well, we use personas and we're using journeys, so we've got all that nailed, so we don't need anything. And then you dig in and you say, great, but you're in product development, so you're developing a user persona.
Yeah.
You're developing a user journey. This is not the buyer journey that marketing need to do. So yeah, it's great that a user in a call center loves your product. Bad news is they don't have the budget, the authority to go buying your product. How much do you understand about the pain of the guy that runs or girl that runs the call center? What's their pain points? And they go, but that's too difficult. What we do know is that, Fred and Frida, they just love using our stuff. You never get to speak to Fred and Frida if Joe and Josephine aren't saying, wow, I have a productivity problem in my call center, or I have a call rate dropout, or just keep going. If you don't identify the business problem, I mean, it's exactly to where, we come back to that value thing. So I've been spending a lot of time. I mean, recently I've been working with people like Apramore. I've been working with people like iGraphics. I did some work with Lean IX in the enterprise architecture space. And of course, anyone listening, the thing that I'm most associated with and most proud to be associated with is the work that I did was, 3.5 years working with Gero Decker at Signavio and helping them get to that point where they got their exit. I mean, I didn't get rich on it. I had a very good contract and they looked after me nicely, but I wasn't there for the exit. But, I'm very proud of the fact that Gero and Mark Hollenstein credit a lot of the story that I created for them is enabling them to get the growth that got there.
Yeah.
But I also, earlier this year, did some work with a company called Cemex. So they're looking at putting in a lot of process management. So it was kind of interesting working with them as an end user, because I don't do a lot of end user consulting. So that was kind of refreshing. So lots of good fun.
Good. And what would be your approach? I mean, how would you come in? I mean, because I have that sort of same thing. Sometimes we talk to people about personas, and it becomes almost too blurry between the different perspectives of the persona, if you like.
Yeah.
I mean, how would you educate somebody into what they need to do?
Yeah, and I think this can, to your point, this can work for someone looking at solving a problem internally as well as externally. You know, if you think about it, when we were, doing the stuff with at Global, we were doing the seminars. I talked about the fact that in a lot of these centers of excellence approaches, whether it's BPMS or process mining or anything, they're excellence looking for somewhere to happen. There's a bunch of technologists in love with their solution, and they're rushing around the business saying, well, you could, you should. Okay, well, we don't do what we could and should. We do what we need and must. So there's a bit of a flip. So even whether you're working internally or looking from a vendor point of view, I come back at the simplest. What problem do you solve?
Yeah.
Who has that problem? Why is it a problem to them? How do they currently get around it? Because we all forget the fact that these are operating businesses. So they've already found a workaround. It might be kludgy, it might be expensive, but they've already got a workaround. So we're actually not going into Greenspeed. So, okay, and why is this or yours a better solution to that problem? If we can't answer those questions, whether we're trying to promote our ideas internally or whether we're a vendor trying to sell product, then we don't have the story. I went through it a lot when working at Gartner and working as an analyst. And it's so frustrating that so often people can't explain. Yeah, well, never mind that. Let me tell you about. It's like, no. If you aren't clear on what problem you're solving for who, and then usually what you get, and process mining is a bit of a good example in this instance. Well, we can solve this or this or this or this. Okay, great. So you can solve everybody's problems. Who's the everybody that's going to buy? Well, yeah, that's what. Right. So drill into a specific.
Yeah.
Specifically, why?
You're 100% right. I mean, I had this conversation. So we built a SaaS platform, and I was having this conversation with an old colleague of mine. And I was saying, I know your business, so I know we could solve this, and this. And that's not to say we're in anything platform. I just know that we can solve these things for you. But what's the first thing that you want to solve? And he said, yeah, well, we only need to solve this thing, what it was, but I'd like to be able to do those other things. So it was, fortunately I had that conversation in the right way, but I had a conversation the week before that where I was on that everyone thing. We can do a lot of stuff, we can do all the stuff, et cetera, et cetera. And the guy that I was talking to said, no, you need to do exactly what you said. You need to be so specific to the point that it's almost a user of one that you're solving it for, because a user of one it's an emotional thing, and then it'll filter down. So if you're going to do it for the CIO or the CTO or the CEO, whatever it is, solve it for them, and then it'll go into the organization. And it could be bottom up as well. But
I think that touching on that is also, it gets scary. Process mining. I'm just going to stay with that one because it's the easiest one.
Yeah.
Is that when we've done the what problem and who's got it, what we potentially realize is that it's $100,000 problem, and we now say and we're trying to sell $1 million product. Could this be why we're not being overly successful? Because too often what we see is that actually we're using sledgehammers to crack nuts. We've got these really neatly packaged, well-identified, really clear problems, but they don't justify the cost of the solution. So then you have to flip it the other way and say, right, I often joke, whether it's process mining, enterprise architecture, process management, that people say, it's hard to sell 100,000, 150,000, whatever. I say, you know what? It's really easy. I guarantee that your boss will go for it. So no, there's no budget. I said, no, you're approaching it wrong. If you want $1 million a year, whether it's a SaaS subscription or for capital, all you've got to do is to show how you're going to save or make 10 million.
Yeah.
If you can do the business case for that, there isn't a CEO and CFO in the land that are not going to be willing to invest. The problem comes when you want them to invest that 500,000 or 1 million for an indeterminate return. Now I'm looking at saying, oh, well, I'm really not sure. I mean, in the enterprise architecture space, when I was at Gartner, you'd frequently get a call that would say, Mark, we're looking at products, but we've looked at everything in the Magic Quadrant, and they're all too expensive. Who else do you recommend? Because my boss is only going to invest 20,000, shall we say, 20,000. And you say, no, they're not investing. They're saying, I don't know what the value of this product is. I don't know what you're going to give me, but I like you, Ryan. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to gamble 20,000. So let's not confuse the investing with the gambling, because we're getting to the point, I don't know what you're going to give me back. So, okay, I'll risk. This is what I'm willing to risk. And then we come down to very small numbers. And as you well know, more often than not, we don't get a decent return. So the cycle goes around, says, well, we tried it. It didn't work. Well, you didn't try the right product to solve the right problem. You basically set yourselves up for failure, not for success.
Yeah. And I mean, it's funny because, I mean, I don't know if you know what my product does, but my product is exactly that. It's the calculation of the value. Why would you do this thing? And it's not just, I mean, when I first designed it, was a big calculator. I say that affectionately. But I actually realized that it needed the workflow as well. The before and the after, the checkpoints, the benchmarking, all those things. And there's pieces, there's more to it. But basically it is that thing. Why would you do this thing? Like, why is it important? And then we do it through a value, so there's a monetary or a risk or a cost, a time or productivity feature to it. And then when you're doing the actual initiative, we're measuring it all the time against what you budgeted to your actual business case. And I liked your 1 million to 10 million ratio. I'd actually had it as 3 to 1. And I think as long as you've got a multiple, I think it's important. That's the important piece.
Well, I mean, I think the old finger in the air number was 6 or 7 to 1 is the traditional CFO ratio that he might expect. And I just figured and said, well, okay, well, if you use a 10 to 1, then you know that you've got something that's going to be pretty compelling. I mean, I think the crazy thing for me is, and I confess I should have looked at the big calculator, but it's also a great example of where people get so myopic. So, and you're bound to have had the conversations, but we should be having this conversation and me saying, and it's fantastic, Ryan, that so many vendors recognize that this is a vendor problem, not just an end user project program realization value problem. Actually, they're struggling to build the ROI for selling their product. Gee, why aren't yes, it's great news that 6 or 7 significant vendors have all decided to OEM and badge engineer your product, Ryan. So that's fantastic that they've all woken up to the fact that they're, rather than focusing on adding more features a la Microsoft Office, which the average user doesn't use. We talked about the digital workplace as your starting point and said, gee, well, the main thing in this digital workplace is we've got a whole bunch of stuff on our machines that we don't use. We've got a whole bunch of cloud software that we just don't need. And vendors are still continuing to develop more and more and more, as opposed to, well, actually, let's step back and provide this calculator, which is actually going to show someone how the value is going to be, what the value could be, how they're going to realize it, and then checkpoint. I mean, to your point about true ups, and I think a lot of vendors would be a lot smarter if they could work to true ups, and indeed a lot of end users would be better to do true ups, and they'd find they spend less money because actually they're not using the stuff as much as they think. But a calculator like that is like saying, okay, well, we can actually demonstrate that it is worth having X extra licenses or fewer licenses to deliver the value. So I guess I'll have to look harder.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I mean, I'll definitely show it to you. And I think the thing that we often and we're actually, so we talked about the sort of how we talk about it. So when I built the product, it was built for digital transformation programs, initiatives. But then the more I looked at it and the more I sort of started hearing things in the market and all the rest of it, I actually started seeing it more as the pre-sales piece and the customer success renewal part. Because what was happening is I was getting involved in a whole lot of things where customers were going to churn and we were following the same methodology that I had put in the product to get the customer to see the value and do the renewal. And that's where the sort of the 3x plus thing came from, because for whatever figure it was, as long as you were 3 or 4 times over, it was good. And we were using very simple parts of the calculator to do that math. And it was always going to be subjective, in the sense that we were using numbers to calculate some stuff. But because they had no numbers before,
yeah,
it gave them something to go, well, oh, okay, so if we do this thing, we'll probably see some return that we hadn't actually ever measured before.
Well, I think that that's an interesting thing in terms of the curve. So if we think about it, that says, whether we look at 5, 7, or 10 times X as the initial acquisition, build the business case, get above the noise, and of course, we can say that 2 or 3 is enough, and it might be, but when you go to the board meeting, there's lots of other things competing, and they also might be 2 or 3. So it's not going to squeeze through. But if you know that if you get to that 7 to 10, then you're going to be getting someone's attention, because it's going to be, that you're going to be solving the right problem and the visible problem. Now, to your point, particularly in our SaaS world, we know that the selling doesn't stop when the deal's done.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're already looking at saying, well, this is a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year contract. I've got to be showing the value. Great. And now I've got to be continuously proving the value to get the renewal. Now, at that point, maybe that it is enough for it to be dropping down to a 2, maybe a 3, that says, oh, okay, well, we've already invested, we've skilled up, we've got people that know this product now, and yes, we're still getting a return, therefore we should still renew. So we don't need, at that point, to be getting the 7 to 10, be nice, but we don't need it. Either as a vendor to justify why you should keep investing in me, or as a COE or a champion inside the organization to keep getting the budget isn't okay. So maybe there's a 2-speed scenario there: 1 to get the deal, 2 to keep the deal.
And I think because I can almost see it in an inverse in some respects. So with some technology, you might bring it in, you'll get a high return very quickly. So I think about, I do a lot of end user compute stuff, and so you'll see a lot of value up front with stability. Just being able to do root cause analysis to get rid of bad drivers, corrupt software, faulty software, all that kind of stuff. So you'll see an initial improvement there. And typically what the measure there for a lot of people is tickets. And I hate that as a measure, but it's what everyone uses. And the reason why I hate it is because tickets aren't actually an indicator of a true problem, really. Because in most cases, a user only logs a ticket when they've got time, if they log them at all. So it could be 7 or 8 days too late. And we did this work with IBM 20 years ago to do this analysis with Watson. But it is an indicator. The quality of the ticket is actually an indicator. What is the information you have inside the ticket that helps you to diagnose the problem? That's a much better indicator. So instead of worrying about whether the ticket's going up and down, it's more worrying about whether the ticket was useful or not, which I think is the metric. But the point I'm trying to make is that in that first maybe 2 years or 3 years, you'll have a very high return because you'll sort out your stability, you'll sort out your hardware issues, you'll sort out your software issues. And then it'll sort of peter off, and you'll start doing automations, which will give you a different kind of return on value. But now that's a more efficiency, effectiveness thing. So you could have your 7, 8, 9, 10 up front, and then it'll go down to a 2, 3 over time. And it'll kind of stabilize at that 2, 3, probably for 10 years, depending on what you're doing. But you'd have to keep doing new initiatives, all the upgrades, because you have to with Windows, you have to always replace it. So you'd have to replace every 3 years. So you'd see those little blips of going 2, 3 up to 5, then down again, and then carrying on like that. So that's actually a very interesting thing to graph out over time, which we have the data, so we could probably in a couple of years of people using the product, we'll start seeing the improvement.
I think that'd be fascinating, and just true to the stuff that I know that you do and have done for many years, is also for people to understand that it's not a binary and understand the numbers. So let's suppose that we go to a 1-to-1 or less than 1 return. It doesn't mean to say the product's bad. We've actually got to go do root cause analysis. Have we lost the trained people? Are we now using lesser trained people?
Yep.
Oh, are we using it wrong? Have we stopped looking? Oh, yeah, actually, don't just assume that, we're not getting the return now, therefore we should ditch it. the question should first be, we're not getting the return. Why? What's changed? Now, it could be in our digital transformation that we've totally transformed that area of the business, and it is redundant, in which case, great, save the money.
Yeah.
It is possible, but it's also possible that you no longer have, a champion, you no longer have the skills and the COE, someone's forgotten, blah, 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 and it's just drifted, and you just need to bring it back into people's awareness.
Yeah, no, and I think the other thing is that there's obviously a lot of focus on the monetary returns, but sometimes that ROI is actually based on a risk thing. What have you mitigated? Now, you could have a situation where the risk to the business is kind of critical that you could shut the business down, but you don't want to necessarily put that number on the table. So you'll just say it's a critical risk. So you can't really do an ROI calculation or ROV calculation, as I prefer to use, but you do put it up there to say this is end the business kind of stuff. Which then we're not talking about multiples. We're just talking about 100% or zero, because you're either going to avoid it or you're going to be taken out. And if you think of all these ransomware things where you're not prepared for it, you could shut a business down. I mean, Maersk went through it, DHL went through it. South Africa, there was a company just coming there. They were using pen and paper. They couldn't even. It took them months to reconcile the pen and paper back to electronic once they went back up. So, these are things that are part of our method is to tie to those things. And I'm now trying to bring in ESG, because I think that's also a factor. I'm not quite sure if it's a multiplier or a divider in the method, but
well, I mean, again, it's going to depend on the size and shape of the organization. I mean, these days, without either condemning them or proing them, if you look at some of the investment funds, never mind the fossil companies, but look at the investment funds where people are perceiving that banks are lending and funds are investing, pension funds, etc., in what's perceived as non-ethical or non-ESG businesses, it actually has a direct share price impact.
That is interesting. I hadn't actually seen that. I'm actually part of a group with a few people that we talk about this a lot, and they're in the positions of being decision makers with buying hardware and software and all the rest of it, and they are making huge efforts to find sustainable vendors. But I actually hadn't realized that it actually reached the point of affecting share prices, because that's actually.
Well, I mean, you're looking at activist investors.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
So for some organisations, I mean, the most obvious one, if you look at the pressure that the activist investors are putting on the pension funds around Shell and BP, for example, it could be any other oil company, but just looking here in the UK, a massive pressure for the banks to stop providing banking, and it's like, okay, it's a far more complex subject, than some people see. In terms of the world is quite as simple as some people see it, but that's not saying is that we can't do things to make things better, shall we say? So I'm going to sit on the fence on some of that stuff. I'll be honest, and get myself in trouble when people listen. I'm going to sit on the fence because can we do better? Yes. Can we just jump off the cliff of some of these things? I don't believe so. I don't believe people are looking at the full consequences of some of these actions in a simplistic way. And, going back to the earlier part of this conversation, it's one of the reasons that I'm quite happy just doing little bits of piecemeal work, because the whole work environment now is, I'm happy that I'm a dinosaur, because I quite frankly, I struggle with a lot of the, shall we say, whether we call them rules, regulations, whether it's ESG, political correctness, etc., etc. The world, in my opinion, has gone mad.
No, I think you're right. I'll give you a bit of a tangible example. So South Africa is undergoing severe power problems, which are mostly due to incompetence of the ANC. Let's not sugarcoat it. But they also have taken these very stupid decisions to take money from the US and the Europeans to go and build renewable power, when it's going to take years to build the power, and they still have to deal with the current problem. And the only way to solve the current problem is to build, coal power stations and refurbish them, which is what is happening. But the interesting thing about it is The Europeans, the US have forced the African countries to go renewable, but they haven't got renewable. And the likes of India and China have definitely not got renewable. So are you really ever going to solve the problem if the main polluters or the main producers of all the problems are not changing? No, you just, all you do is making it look good. You're putting, lipstick on a pig. So, I mean, from that point of view, I think the answers are fairly obvious. And I think there's stuff you can do just as a normal person, but I don't think you can get worried about stuff at the higher levels necessarily because you can't control it personally. You can just influence it with your voting and where you spend your money.
So you touched on the South Africa. I mean, you know that I spent a lot of time down there over the years, and you know, I mean, Eskom was one of my clients as well. So very familiar with that. And indeed, my late uncle actually ran, or pretty well ran a company down in South Africa that was doing a lot of work on the power stations. So he predicted a long time before that there were going to be problems and outages because the maintenance was all being cut back. But the joke used to be down in South Africa was that, I'm the white guy from Europe that dares to talk about black empowerment in South Africa. It's like, you can't go there, Mark. And I said, you can, because it's really simple. Smart people don't like working for dumb people. And there are some really smart black people working in some amazing organizations, and this was years ago down there. And quite frankly, they don't like working for the dumb people that have been parachuted in. This has got nothing to do with color. Everything to do with personalities and personality types. So it's regardless, it's cronyism. That's the problem. The color of the people that are cronies doesn't really matter, because if we go back into the days of white rule, then there are going to be a bunch of incompetent people in a number of places that were every bit on the take, but their color was different.
Yeah, no, and look, I mean, I always joke about how the ANC learned all the tricks from the Nats, but they didn't see all the underworking pieces. So they saw them all living in big houses, but they didn't see the other stuff that actually was happening. So they only know how to steal the money, but not how to make sure that there's always money in the future, which was just bad education, by the previous party, because there should have been like a handover. This is how you do the corruption. This is how you keep the country going, so there's more corruption available. That kind of conversation. But and I think that's the hope. We've been back a few times, and I mean, I get the sense from the ground up that there's that color thing is not nearly as emphasized as the government wants it to be. Everyone just gets on with it; they don't care, and I think that's a good thing. I think it'll take generations to sort itself out. Unfortunately for me, I might retire still back there with my kids. We'll probably live here, but it'll sort itself. It's still a beautiful country.
I mean, I love it down there. I've got loads of friends, as you know, about being in Joburg, Cape Town. I can remember the days of, even as things were starting to change down in Cape Town, where everyone hated the Joburgers coming down with Joburg attitudes, because actually in Cape Town people had found ways of just getting along together. And it was a pretty great place to be. So there's a lot of hope there. But to your point, sadly, and it doesn't care what color the money is coming down until the money filters down to provide opportunity for those many disenfranchised people, then it's just not going to happen. No. And that's the sad part, is that the country has the wealth to dig itself out.
Yeah, no, and the ANC's just kept the poor man poor. And we saw it when we were in Mossel Bay. And load shedding kicked in, because the load shedding wasn't all the way through Mossel Bay. It was like only just one section, and then it started to hit other sections. And the thing is that, if you've got means in South Africa, you live a very good life. But if you don't have means, it's very tough. And that's the problem, is the people, there's the majority's at that level. So when you get cold, they can't afford the electricity, the power, the blankets, all that kind of stuff. And that's, the ANC sit there with all the money, and those are the people that suffer. Anyway, I don't want to get too political, because we can't go down the route on that one.
But we should turn it back round and let's keep it on track, because I think it is relevant, and say, so the question comes, when we look at that digital workplace and that digital transformation, how will those people that are disenfranchised either benefit from what's going on, or be able to utilize those to create new opportunity? I mean, how's that? And that doesn't matter whether we look at South Africa or whether we can stay here in the UK and look at some of the poorer states, when you've got the kids with some degree of means, not rich people, going to school with their own laptops, iPads, everything else, and now you've got another bunch of kids in certain estates in parts of the country, US, UK, South Africa, doesn't really matter, where there is no internet at home. There is no iPads, laptops. So are we actually, is digital actually going to make things worse?
So it's the have-nots discussion. Now, the interesting thing, thinking about South Africa specifically, is the uneducated, who are kept uneducated by the government, this government, not the previous one, as much at least, is the people today now have access to phones with connectivity generally in most places, and they're learning via distributed things like TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube, etc. So the education is coming in an uncontrolled way for the governments. You see it here as well. I mean, I was in a school here a couple of months ago now, and every kid had a phone. It may not be the most fancy, best one, but it was a smartphone, so they could definitely watch YouTube and they could do all that stuff. Now, where they got the attitude, with any of them, the attitude to learn anything, that's obviously debatable. But I think the point is that it's accessible. And then there's a friend of mine, Freddie Quirk. He's involved with the Digital Poverty Alliance, and they're going after all the hardware or various things to distribute it to people that don't have that hardware, to bring it up the levels, because he saw it with what he was doing and it really upset him that people don't have access to the stuff, therefore the kids don't learn. And if you look at, and there was something I was listening on the radio, the wealth is not so much about having money, it's having all the means to handle your problems, and medical treatment and technology to do things, all that kind of stuff. And that's where the gap starts, is the people with the means can accelerate, and the people without the means stay at a level because they're always at that level. And that's what we have to solve.
Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting that that really drives home that whether it's charities, whether it's people thinking about it, the phone as the vehicle. So I'm learning French using Duolingo as an example.
Me too.
But if you think about that experience, you've got nothing significant to gain by using it on your laptop. The experience is geared for the mobile device.
Yes, 100%.
So we naturally then come in and say, well, okay, if we want to give people access, whether it's to doctors, whether it's low-cost banking, whether it's learning maths, learning languages, then actually it's about making sure, to your point, that it's available, made to create a great experience on those types of devices, almost like the gamification of Duolingo.
Yep.
Because maybe someone doesn't want to learn a language, but they like the idea of earning badges and doing whatever, which causes a learning experience when they think they're playing a game. So I don't know. I've got no games loaded, or pretty well no games loaded on my phone, but there are a number of games out there, and you think, well, okay, well, maybe games is what people want. So how do we persuade the game makers to embed, be it maths or literacy, so that for someone that thinks they're playing a Dungeons and Dragons, shall we say, that they're having to type in properly structured sentences, for example. I mean, crazy example. Therefore, they inevitably are learning English, or actually, you've got to do this calculation in order to get this next weapon or whatever. So they have to be learning. They don't want to be learning maths, and they don't see themselves as learning maths or basic math skills, but actually it's because they want to play the game, but they can't help.
And it actually falls in the category of serious games. And we did this a couple of years ago. And there's actually a lot on the App Store. And it's not just for training kids and that sort of thing, but there's even companies training their own staff on policies, procedures, safety things, that sort of thing. That's where we were looking at it from. And I think it's going to come, this generative AI wave we're going through right now, where you can generate a lot of code easier. Let's not say it's 100% easier, but let's say it's 20-30% easier because you're generating it. I think that'll speed up the availability of more tools or more apps that someone who's got an idea to solve a problem wouldn't have been able to do. But now, because they can generate some code, at least to get to that point of an MVP or a demo viable product would now get some momentum. And also a lot of people are focused on community-based stuff. So if that person can get their demo thing ready and put it to a community and get some people interested and then crowdfund it, maybe you end up with a solution that you wouldn't have had before. And that solution can come from the people feeling the most pain. So they can come from the person that's in that ecosystem that says, there must be a better way, and gets them going. And you're right, form factor is important.
Cool.
So great, Mark. I mean, I think it's probably a good part to end there. I think we've talked about a lot of interesting stuff. Do you want people to get in contact with you, or do you want to be left alone?
No, I'm always happy to hear from people, but I mean, easiest ways to reach out to me via LinkedIn. Always interested to see, and I'm sure that people will have more to say about our comments about our friends and thoughts around South Africa, and I think that will certainly get a few people talking. But for both of us, I mean, you obviously lived and worked there, but that I spent a lot of time down there over the years. It's coming from a place of love and hope, right? I mean, that's the thing. It's everything we've said, both of us, is nothing about knocking or putting down the people. It's just that frustration that it's such a beautiful and rich country with so much potential wealth to share that we would just love and hope to see it move on to the next stage, to being what it could become.
Yeah, and you hear that from everyone. I mean, that the potential's there, and that's it just needs to be harnessed. But it's okay. The Rugby World Cup's coming up. We'll just see some potential there.
Yeah, I'm not sure that England will see much potential from what I'm seeing these days, but
I think I mean, I think there's still a good enough amount of players there to be competitive. I just hope that they get it right on the day. Time will tell. Tournaments are fun. There's no way to predict tournaments.
Indeed. Well, listen, Ryan, an absolute pleasure speaking with you, as ever. Thank you so much for inviting me. I look forward to seeing some stuff on that value calculator and taking a look.
The value work, definitely. Yeah. Send you the YouTube channel. I'll send you the link, or you can have a watch, and I'll show you some other stuff on the download as well.
Yeah, brilliant. And I'll make sure that I put down a link on LinkedIn, both to the podcast, obviously, when you tell me it's up there, and also pointing out that we were talking about the value calculator, and that should help drive some more people to have a listen and have a look.
Love it. I really appreciate it, Mark. Thanks for chatting.
No worries. Take care.
Cheers, Dave. Bye.
Go well.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Heather Bicknell is our producer and editor. Thank you, Heather, for your hard work on this episode. Please subscribe to the series and rate us on iTunes or the Google Play Store. Follow us on Twitter @the DWW Podcast. The show notes and transcripts will be available on the website www.digitalworkspace.works. Please also visit our website www.digitalworkspace.works and subscribe to our newsletter. And lastly, if you found this episode useful, please share with your friends or colleagues.